these lives are full of little miracles about to happen. Yeah. I was very much impressed with how profound it is. The promise is that God gave us that from generation to generation to generation, those that are righteous in Him, that have been made righteous through Christ, through His death and resurrection, that their prayers keep on being manifested in the different generations, from generation to generation. And I have thought back, you know, my people and my heavens, there's just ministers by the carload. In fact, one of my uncles, great uncle, was a traveling evangelist on horseback in New Brunswick. And he traveled around the country preaching and teaching. Can you believe that? Now, that was one of Daddy's uncles. Then Dad had, his father was a minister. In fact, minister of the church where Mother and Dad met. And Daddy was the baby of the family of 7. Porter. Theodore Porter, Dr. Theodore Porter. And there's several Theodores in our family. But anyway, dear little Freddie was the baby. That was my dad. And his father died of tuberculosis just, I think, before Daddy was a year old. Think of that. That was a miracle. He didn't contract. You know, they didn't know how to treat it in those days. But anyway, the church was Brunswick Street Baptist Church, and it's built like a little cathedral in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. And that's where Grandpa was 50 years. My grandfather, Mother's father, was superintendent of the Sunday school for 50 years. They gave him a beautiful silver watch, gold watch, I guess it was, with JWS on it. And guess who's got it? John. He's named John Spurgeon. See, I know God had a lot to do with naming John, because he's just exactly like Mother's people. Just exactly. He just doesn't take after Daddy's family. But anyway, Daddy was real mischievous. He was this little preacher's son, and of course all these grown-up brothers and sisters, I mean, they thought they were grown up, and they were so poor that when uncles or aunts or somebody would send little Freddie something for his birthday, maybe a quarter or 50 cents or something like that, he had to give it into the family coffers for food. So Daddy grew up, but he had such spiritual background and the life that his mother's name was Elizabeth, and I've got her picture right by yours in the living room. It's in the original frame, old-timey, beautiful gold frame, and a little picture of you right there. I'll have to show it to you next time you come over. But anyway, she died on his 16th year. I don't know whether it was his birthday or not. And there he was, just alone in the world. And so he went to the pastor of the church that took over when his dad died. And he said, Doctor, was his name Poole? Seemed to me like it was. And he said, I want to be baptized again. So the pastor took him out to the St. John River, which is just gorgeous, goes right through Fredericton, and baptized him. And Daddy told me in a moment of, he never talked about himself. But after he had the heart attack, I was there in Columbus, and he was very tender-hearted and open to talk. And he told me that at that time, he came up out of the water a changed man. He was so darling. Gosh. Well, then, I think it was right then, that he got the call to be a minister. 16. So he decided to do the things to prepare. So he went to work for Mother's father, who was president of the Bank of Montreal in Fredericton. And he'd already knew he was going to marry Mother. He picked her out when they were just little teeny-weeny things. And she had long blonde hair, about like yours. And he'd sit behind her in Sunday school and pull her hair. Yeah. And then another thing, a little story that I've got to stick in here. His best friend was named Mont Wiley. And I've heard about Mont Wiley, but I never saw him, never knew him or anything else except that he was one of Daddy's little buddies. And they used to get into some real wild things together. And in other words, they'd go pick cherries off of a neighbor's cherry tree and try to tell them they hadn't been into the cherries in their mouths. It'd just be covered with cherry juice. And then the worst thing that they ever did was to get on a hearse. You know, everything went by sleigh in the winter. And you could stand on the side of a sleigh with your feet on the runners and just go. They were having this formal funeral, and Mont and little Freddie were riding on the hearse to the cemetery. So that I never heard what kind of punishment he got, but I'm sure he got it. But anyway, that was just neither here nor there. Oh no, you haven't. I haven't told anybody. But then, on top of that, Daddy decided that he would have to prepare himself for the ministry the best he could. So he went to work for John Spurgeon, Mother's father. And so he saved his money and earned, because he didn't have any mother and father, you know, and the other boys were struggling to get their educations and so forth. And so he said he even took, or maybe Mother told me, that he took singing lessons. He took voice, because he knew in a congregation that if the Spirit led him, he'd have to sing. Lead the singing, you know. So he didn't leave any stones unturned. And he saved up money to go to Acadia University in Nova Scotia. And so Nana and Grandpa decided to send Mother there too. And they went. And we were there just 5 years ago when we went to Canada, you know. Evelyn and your mother and Dad. And they had all the Porter records in the archives down in the basement of the university. Isn't that something? Well, anyway, Daddy worked waiting tables in one of the restaurants for his food. And he graduated in his lower AB in 3 years. But he just went steadily along, you know, and he'd go without meals, do everything. And Mother graduated in piano, fine arts. And she was teaching piano for years. Why she didn't teach Evelyn and me, I don't know. No, Evelyn can play real well. But I left home so early, I wasn't quite dry behind the ears, whatever that is. But But anyway, Daddy and Mother took a church in Liverpool, Nova Scotia. That was their first church. And I have the china that congregation gave to Mother and Dad when they were pastors there. That was his first pastor. Oh, my stars. Probably about 1910. Oh, before they had any family or anything, you know. But anyway, then he was called to the Germaine Street Baptist Church in St. John, New Brunswick. Right up from the Bay of Fundy, beautiful location. And a big, big church. And see, the Holy Spirit was working in his life then. Because he didn't have the experience that a lot of them had, but people loved him, and he was so outgoing. He just looked after his flock. I mean, if somebody wasn't at church Sunday, he was over there checking on them. He was a shepherd of the shepherds. So anyway, that's where Evelyn was born when they were there in 1912. And then 2.5 years later, I was born in I guess it was the tail end of 1914 in October. And Mother has told me that the parsonage was connected to the church. You know, they used to have quite well, I guess it always was a custom to provide the living quarters for the pastor. And so I was born in that building, in that little home. Yeah. Yes, practically. Well, then Mother said, of course, she was nursing me, and Evelyn was raising Cain. She was about 2.5 or 3 years old, you can imagine. And since the church was connected, Mother used to get me, and she would go over to and sit on the stairway and listen to the sermon. And the choir, it was the little stairway that led into the choir loft, I guess. But anyway, I guess I heard the Word of God long before I ever could understand. So anyway, that was precious. Then came the war. First World War. And Daddy conscientiously felt that he had to go. So this was just before I was born that the war broke out and everything. But anyway, Daddy joined the Canadian forces. And that was early in the game, before America was ever involved, you know. And so he's told me, and I've heard the story, I don't know who from, but somebody in the family, I guess it was Daddy himself told me, that when that huge military ship pulled out of the harbor at the Bay of Fundy in St. John, that there was the most glorious sunset that he ever saw in his life, and it reflected in the water. And he said he took it as a word from the Lord that he would come back. And I want you to know that during the war, he had a horse, Black Beauty, shot from under him. Dead. I mean, just killed the horse. Daddy went on his way, you know. He was a chaplain at first, and then later he was a major. I guess they give the chaplains, you know, encouragement and positions of honor. And then he had, you've heard of kit bags? Well, they were big bundles of their belongings that they carried on their back. And that thing was shot full of holes. And he never had a hair on his head disturbed. Can you believe that? And he was there 4 solid years. And his first job for 2 years, I guess, when he first went as a chaplain, was to minister to the dying in the Flanders Field. The poppies grow. Remember that? Do you remember that poem? In Flanders Field, the poppies grow to mark the something, row by row. Well, it's a famous poem. And that's where he ministered to the poor soldiers that were shot and getting ready to die. He had, and the little communion service that he always carried with him to give those men communion, you know. And I've got it. It's on the organ. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's sterling silver and got the Maltese cross engraved on it. Maltese cross comes out like this instead of just being squared off. The ends, Maltese cross. And it's on the little plate for the bread. And on the outside of the cup, which is on a pedestal, is really beautiful. And then he had a little glass container for the wine. And they had to have wine because the water was condemned, you know. And it has a silver screw top with the Maltese cross. It's just beautiful. I polished it last night. And, yeah. And a little tiny wooden box for the bread with the top that's screwed on, and it had carved in the box, on the top of the box, the Maltese cross. And they're on our organ. I want you all to see them. They're absolutely beautiful. And so then Dad was selected. Of course, the Americans came, you know, at the time when God knew they needed help. And they came and won the war. Well, Mother and everybody thought Daddy'd be home right away, you know, 1918. But lo and behold, he was appointed by, I don't know who, the king or somebody, to go to establish peace in Germany. I used to think the Germans were bears. I was just 4 years old, yeah. And I didn't know who Daddy was. I just knew his picture. And I thought they were bears. But anyway, he didn't come home for another year. It was 1920, I guess, when he came home. And I remember how strange I felt with him. Because I loved him. He loved me, you know. And but he didn't take advantage of it. He didn't just force himself on me, you know, or cuddle me or anything until I felt at home with him. And I remember Mother used to say, "How are you going to know your daddy when he comes home?" And I remember saying this. I really remember it. I said, "Well, I'll know him by his picture." And he was all in uniform with his Canadian beautiful uniform, you know, and billed cap and all that. And when he came home, he was still in uniform, but I don't know. I think he had a mustache when he was in the service, and that was gone. So I wasn't quite sure. Wasn't quite sure it was the same man that was in the picture. Probably. You know, at that age, you're so taken up with yourself, you don't know what's going on. And Evelyn and I both got whooping cough while Daddy was gone. And there was Mother having to wrestle with Evelyn and me with whooping cough. And I remember she'd sit us up on her lap before we went to bed and rub our tummies with this real strong ointment of some sort that penetrated so we wouldn't cough in the night. But then the real tragic thing happened. Our precious Grandpa Spurden caught it. And he'd never been sick a day in his life, honestly. The doctor told him, that his condition with his tonsils were the only ones that he'd ever seen that dried up normally. Because when you're through with them, they're supposed to dry up. Did you ever hear that? Yeah. And Grandpa's had. And he was so cute. He had bright blue eyes, about like yours. And he had little white curly things coming down here and a little ball right there. When you see his picture, you'll know who he is. But anyway, Evelyn and I used to braid them. Yeah, we'd try to braid them, you know. We'd sit one on each side, and we'd sit on top of his hands so he couldn't, we were playing, you know. And we'd sit on the couch, and Grandpa'd put his hands down like this, and Evelyn and I would pile all these pillows off the divan on top of the pillows. And we thought every pillow we put on there would keep him quiet. The more pillows, the more force we'd have on him, you know. Then we'd sit on top of the pillows, and then we'd start braiding. And right in the middle of everything, he'd spend all this time. Oh, we'd tie him up, as I recall. We'd tie his hand, and he just let us do anything. And by the time we're halfway through braiding his sideburns, he'd be loose. And he'd come up and tickle us and play rickety-hoo, whatever that was. Rickety-hoo was the game we figured out with him. Rickety-hoo. Yeah, he made that up, I guess. Yeah, he'd tickle us, and then we'd go hide, and he'd come find us. And, oh, it was precious. But anyway, I wanted to tell you one other thing we did that was not so very good. Evelyn and I would get into it, really, we did. We must have driven Mother and Nana and Grandpa crazy.
Let me go back up a second. Was that Theodore?
No. That was Daddy's.
Yeah, he died.
He died.
Okay, so that was Mommy's dad.
Yeah. No, it was Grandpa Fred's father. See? But he was pastor of the little Brunswick Street Church. What is it you don't know?
I thought Grandpa Fred's dad died.
He did.
when he was young.
He did. He was a minister.
Who was this that you were braiding?
Mother's father. My mother, the other side of the house.
What was his name?
John Spurgeon.
Okay, all right.
And he was president of the Bank of Montreal in Fredericton.
Gotcha.
Okay, where are we?
You're gonna talk about
Oh, rickety hoo.
confidence.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were sitting in front. We had an open fire, of course, in this little house with Nana and Grandpa, where we lived with Mother and Nana and Grandpa. And so this fire was on, and Grandpa Spurgeon, John Spurgeon, would take his handkerchief out and stand with his back to the fire and the handkerchief down there and get it all warm, and then he'd wrap it all up and put it in his pocket. He was an Englishman from the word go. And so one night, Evelyn and I devised the plan that when he got up to do that, when he turned around or to stoke the fire or something, you know, we'd pull the chair out from the chair he'd been sitting on, and he would just go back there. The lights were out and everything. He'd sit down. He sat down. There was no chair. And he was way up in his 70s, so wonder it didn't kill him. Because he'd already been through the whooping cough. And then we pulled his chair out from under him. And I remember how guilty I felt when he hit the floor. I don't know how he ever got up. It was just too late. I don't remember any punishment we ever got or anything. The details just, it was the happening that I remember. But anyway, then finally, where are we? Daddy and Mother got married. and after they got out of college, and went to that little church in Liverpool and back. Okay. And he's gone to the war now and come home. Okay. So then he couldn't take a church because his stomach, he had had such questionable diet in France, you know, that he developed something. I guess if he hadn't been so deep in the Lord, he would have had stomach ulcers, but he didn't. He just had to watch his diet. And the doctors suggested that he not be confined to preaching or any specified hours or being inside, that he needed to be outside and maybe traveling. So he went with the Canadian Bible Society. You know, the American Bible Society, but this was the Canadian Bible Society. And he traveled all over New Brunswick, and I don't know what they did or all I knew was that he wasn't home very much. But he had bought us a beautiful home in Hampton, a suburb of St. John, and a big 2-story house, lovely place, you loved it. Had a grove of trees in the back that I set on fire one time, and man, did I get it. Woo! That's the only time I remember Daddy spanking me. He spanked me with the back of the brush. Oh, and the funny part was I would not admit it. Well, the thing was, this Mrs. Angevine that lived next door came over one morning, the morning after, I guess. And I was just shaking in my shoes because she knew that I had done it. And she came over to see Mother. And I remember hiding in the pantry, in the kitchen, and listening to her tell all this stuff about me, and I thought I was going to die. Oh, I'm not like Miss Angevine ever since. She was something else. A lovely lady up to then. But anyway, Daddy built us, Evelyn and me, a darling little camp out in the grove of trees. And I remember it was an old, what would you call it, a pig pen or something that he got hold of. And it was all cleaned up and everything. And he made us a little stove and the place to put our dishes and all the stuff, you know. And I remember Evelyn one time, she fixed a pan of fudge and passed it to me, and it was dirt. She had made a mud pie and let it cook in the sun. You know what? It took me hours to get all the grit and grit out of my mouth. I did everything, but Evelyn was always pulling funnies on me. It was funny, I'm telling you. You didn't have a big sister. I know it. Did he ever do anything to you?
Told me to close my eyes and open my mouth, and I think there was one dandelion cups in there.
Oh my goodness. Well, I was so crazy about fudge. And Mother made elegant fudge for us. And this looked exactly like it. It had the little crust, smooth crust on top and everything. And Evelyn had scored it in little squares like Mother did, you know. And I thought, oh, joy. I believed anything Evelyn ever told me. And I'd get into more messes. And then she'd tell me in the upstairs of that lovely home where we lived, we had a room and slept together. Well, she had an imagination that would not stop. And she would tell me ghost stories at night and just scare the living daylights out of me. I'd start crying, and Daddy or Mother'd have to come piling upstairs, you know, and comfort me. And then she had little playmates that when she was alone, she'd go to the stairs and holler upstairs and say, Valley Tibby, you can come down. Mother's gone. Or something like that, you know. Valley Tibby. That was her little playmate. So it was real funny. But let me see. Oh, yeah. Then Daddy was gone on a trip. And Daddy's brother, one of these 7 kids in this preacher's family, the Porters, Theodore Porter's family, and Elizabeth, Henry Alford Porter. Now that was Daddy's, one of his big brothers. And he also was a minister. And he built the First Baptist Church down here in Oklahoma City. He came to Oklahoma City on a venture with a famous ear, eye, nose, and throat specialist, Dr. Todd. There was a Dr. Todd. And they came from New Brunswick to Oklahoma. And it was just, wasn't even a state. And the First Baptist Church was called the White Temple. And it was clear down on Broadway, almost to down to Main Street. And they wanted to move out. So you know where it is now. It's on 12th and Robinson. That huge red building and all the connecting buildings with it and everything. That same church that my uncle Henry Alford Porter, my uncle Harry, built it when he was there. I mean, he was the pastor when it was built, brother. And we got one of the history books of the First Baptist Church not too many years ago. And there's a whole section to Henry Alford Porter. And well, anyway, he invited his little brother, Fred Porter, to come down to Oklahoma. And little Trinity Church, Trinity Baptist Church, here on the corner of 23rd and Douglas, was a little mission church. A little mission of the First Baptist Church, Uncle Harry's church. So he thought, well, I'll just let Fred preach there. And the Sunday that he's here and so forth and so on. I don't know what else went on, but he preached that one Sunday at the little mission church. And lo and behold, when he got back to Canada, to Hampton, that phone started ringing. And it was Oklahoma. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, calling Dr. Frederick S. Porter. And honey, we had one of these phones. We were sort of in the, we weren't in a city, we were in the suburbs. And we had a phone that was attached to the wall. And the phone park, I couldn't reach it or anything, but it was a party line and all that stuff, and it would ring all the time, and everybody had their own rings, you know. And I remember that thing ringing with our signal. And Daddy would talk, and Daddy would talk. He was talking to H.C. Miller, the chairman of the Board of Deacons at Trinity. And time went on, he didn't tell us anything. But finally he said, we're going to Oklahoma. And of course I was excited. Evelyn about died because she had all her friends in school there and oh, you know, this and that. But anyway, I remember when he told us that. And I'd been in bed for 3 months because I had almost had infant consumption. It's such extreme weather there, you know. Oh golly, below zero most of the winter. And so I remember mother and Dad taking me into St. John for x-rays and things. I didn't know anything was wrong with me. And I remember getting in this awful looking, great, big machine, I guess it was, and the door looked like a safe. And I stood in there and they shut the door and I just, you know, it was an x-ray machine, early version of something like that. And the doctor, when he got through, said that my lungs were coated, whatever that is, and that I would have to go home and be put to bed till I was all right. And it's an infant consumption. Well, Mother had 2 sisters that died with it. Mother was the only child that lived, you know. But it was quite common in that cold country. Yeah, infant tuberculosis, they called it.
But you weren't an infant then.
No, they just called it when they weren't adults. Anyway, Mother looked after me so meticulously. Oh, imagine bringing me 3 meals a day. I couldn't even put my foot on the floor. She was so particular. I couldn't read. I hadn't even learned to read yet. And she'd come up and read to me by the hour. And Evelyn was in school. I don't remember much what she did, but she was just a passing thing. I didn't even pay attention. But when I got up, I was okay. Just okay. So God entered into my life and healed me, really healed me. And we've had lots of healings in our family that have just been miraculous. But anyway, we were getting ready to move to Oklahoma. And Daddy the doctor had told him that the warm climate down here in the southern part of the United States would be so much more advantageous for me and for him. And so all in all, he felt that this was really God calling. So we came here. The teacher that I had, I guess, I don't know whether it was first grade or where it was by that time. But anyway, she said, Carol, you're going to move to Oklahoma in the United States. And she said, the only thing I know about Oklahoma is that it's a treeless state full of oil and Indians. That's where you're going. And I thought, oh, how exciting, you know. I just thought that'd be grand. See, Indian. We had Indians in Canada, but they were the Hiawatha Indians. They wove baskets and all sorts of things like that. Did beadwork and this and that. But they weren't too well known, you know, or took part in that government or anything like that. So I just thought it was going to be great. And it was. I had never seen or heard tell of a gas stove. See, everything there was wood. We had a wood furnace, wood and coal furnace, you know, in the basement, and all these radiators in every room, all over everywhere, and big fireplaces in every room. And I remember the earthquakes we used to have, and all the china would rattle in the dining room by the fireplace. Oh yeah, we had earthquakes often, and our bed would move across the floor. I don't remember any serious damage ever coming from any of them, but it was active. And we had earthquakes. But anyway, then it was a new piece of pie when we came to Oklahoma. And my dear mother, I don't know how she ever made it. She packed barrels and barrels and barrels to be shipped to some place she didn't even know where she was going. And she was raised by English parents in Canada. And I just don't know how. That was a miracle that Mother was able to adjust. Really was. And I remember we were 2,500 miles is how far it was from where I was born. 2,500 miles. And I remember we came by Pullman, and Evelyn was sick. I guess she was homesick already or whatever. She was just curled up in a ball in one of the seats of the train the whole time, and Mother and Daddy somehow get her off when we changed trains. And then we stopped in St. Louis, and Uncle Harry was there, the pastor of one of the big churches in St. Louis by then. And I remember we spent the night there, and he called us his little Canadian Valentines. Because it must have been Valentine's Day. So anyway, that was something. And then being initiated into Oklahoma, Mother said there must be a lot of Indians in Oklahoma. And I remember one of the ladies was questioning her and said, "Well, why do you think so?" And she said, "Because they say, huh, and and whatever they grunt." She'd never heard. They say, huh, and She thought they were Indian talk, you know. So Mother was a brave little gal, I'll tell you that. And we didn't help her. We didn't raise a hand. We didn't do anything. Just good for nothings. Just enjoyed everything. Well, when you see some of the pictures now, the family pictures that your mother and I are going to go through, you'll recognize. And I remember a man came by with a goat on 23rd Street there to the parsonage, and it had a little red wagon attached to it. And he would take pictures of the children sitting in that little red wagon with the goat. And that's I've got that picture. I think you did too. Oh, it was awful. Oh, Deanna, I was the worst looking little kid you ever saw. I really was, because I couldn't see anything. I was blind. I mean, almost blind. I was so nearsighted. And so I would take my glasses off under the slightest provocation. If I thought I was going to see anybody, I'd pull my glasses off. Consequently, I missed half the show. And I remember standing up. No, this was before I got my glasses. I didn't get my glasses till I came to the United States. But in Hampton, before we left, I remember this little consolidated school. And I remember the teacher would line us up on both sides of this classroom. And she'd have a whole bunch of stuff on the board, and each child was supposed to say what was there and what was next, and each one would take a word, you know. Well, it would come to me, and I didn't see anything on the board, so I'd just make up a word, and I'd have to go sit down every time. Oh, it was awful. And then they tested my eyes when I came to the States, and I guess you had to have your eyes tested and be vaccinated before you could go to school those days. Now I went to Jefferson. You know where that bank is that looks like a beehive on 23rd and Classen? That's the site of Jefferson Grammar School. That's where... Yeah, yeah. Yeah. While we were in Georgia, it broke my heart because I loved that Jefferson school. But anyway, I don't want to go on and on and on, Deanna. I don't want to tell you more right now, do I? Whatever you want.